Well, I couldn't care less about the cocaine, and I don't think the American people do either.
Wrong, but go ahead.
Okay.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, May 27th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington bureau chief Carl Cannon. Well, President Trump may be giving up on his hope that Vladimir Putin wants peace in Ukraine, Tom. He posted on Sunday that he was considering additional sanctions. Instead of Putin this, he said, he's killing a lot of people. I don't know what's wrong with him. What the hell happened to him? But in other news today, Russia said that Trump and Putin have agreed on an exchange of prisoners. Some see that as a positive step in the relationship. But the pressure does seem to be building for more sanctions and maybe even stronger military measures. Tom, has the worm finally turned for Trump on this?
It certainly seems like Trump's patience has worn out. And one of the things about Trump that is, love him, hate him, for better or worse, when he posts on X, I mean, you could see and sense the exasperation in his voice. What the hell's going on with Putin? He's gone totally crazy. I mean, it's as if he was saying it right to you, live. You could sense how frustrated he's become with the situation. Again, this is something that, remember he said, never would have started if I'd been president. I'll put a stop to it first day. Here we are, 4 months into his term, and Putin just launched his most extensive attack yet over the weekend, hundreds of drones into Ukraine, exploding drones. And so it's not going in the right direction. Trump has tried basically everything, and he has been, I think, fairly patient with Putin, wants to, just a week or two ago, he was talking about how they were going to have this phone call or they had the phone call and it was good. And they talked about all of the, trade that was going to happen and everybody was going to get rich and it was going to be all great. Well, that doesn't seem to have convinced Putin at all. And so I think Trump is kind of, throwing up his hands at the whole situation. And if he can't get these guys to the table, Putin in particular, we've seen the reporting on this. He's threatening to just sort of walk away.
Yeah. So, Carl, as Tom mentioned, I think he fired like 355 drones on Sunday, 9 missiles, 12 people were killed, including children. And these were attacks on student dormitories and civilian targets. Pretty bad stuff. So is it too late, though? I mean, is Trump sort of missed the boat on this?
Well, Trump's the last person on this planet who thought that Vladimir Putin could be reasoned with. Trump asked the question, what's wrong with Putin? I can answer it. The answer was supplied to us in an interview I did with Garry Kasparov, the former Soviet chess champion who we interviewed several years ago. And he said that Vladimir Putin was a bloodthirsty psychopath and there was no reasoning with him at all. Now, that seemed like a harsh judgment to me at the time, but everything that's happened since then has confirmed that judgment. And Donald Trump has come across, since he's been president the second time, as naive, which is not normally a word we associate with President Trump. He doesn't understand the depths of Putin's pathology. This was a guy who was a junior level KGB agent, and when the Berlin Wall fell, the whole world rejoiced, but not Putin. He thought it was the worst day in Russia since Peter the Great was alive, and he wants to reconstitute the old Soviet Empire. So there are lessons here, and nobody wants to be branded a warmonger or a neocon or any other of these pejorative terms we use, but the Western world has learned this lesson time and again, and you have to stop the aggression somewhere. And in Ukraine, the West has a partner who's willing to fight and die to protect their country. So this is an ominous development. I wouldn't give much credence. We didn't know, none of the three of us knew what Trump meant when he said this thing would be easy to solve. A third-rate negotiator could fix it. The tell was that he kept saying that the war would never have started when I was president. Well, first of all, there's no evidence that's true. And secondly, it's beside the point. He promised to fix it in a day. Now he's thinking he doesn't have a partner for peace in Vladimir Putin. Europe has to step up, I guess. Huh?
I would say in fairness to Trump, he's not the only one who, George W. Bush famously said he saw into Putin's soul, and and then he invaded Georgia, and Barack Obama had the reset button with Hillary Clinton. Remember that? And then they invaded Crimea. So this is
yes, Tom, but me and Gary Kasparov never had any illusions.
Okay. Well, when you say he's the only person on the planet, I think there is this sense that when you're president, that you can fix the problem, or better, or you have a strategy that's going to work. The other guy didn't know. And I think that kind of played into what Trump was doing here. But we've had 3 successive presidents now and the same result all 3 times. So maybe the problem isn't us, it's him.
And I think that Tom makes an interesting point there. Our presidents, and near presidents, Hillary Clinton and Obama, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton was certainly like this. There's an essential humanity there and essential reasonableness, and they tend to assume those traits on the part of other people, other world leaders, but not everybody's like that.
Yeah. Well, the question I have, Tom, is this: is that Trump, in every tweet, every time he says he's going to walk away, and we never know whether he means he's walking away from the war and supporting Ukraine, or whether he's walking away from the peace table. Do you have any sense of what when he says I'm walking away, what is he walking away from?
Well, he's frustrated with Zelensky too. I mean, I think he was walking away from peace talks, is my understanding of that. As he's been trying to get these guys to the table, and he's pissed off at we had the blow up with Zelensky in the White House, and he even dinged Zelensky the other day in that same post that mentioned Putin, that Zelensky won't shut up and he's talking, he continues to talk and make trouble by opening his mouth. So he's not happy with either of them. And again, patience, I think, is worn down to the nub. And so he might just be like, forget you guys and walk away from trying to settle this thing. Now, where does that leave Ukraine? Where does that leave our support for Ukraine? Now, we do have, a push in the Senate for sanctions right now, including a lot of Republicans. I think 80 senators have signed on or something to that effect. So, we'll see what happens if something comes out of it. Is Trump really going to veto that? I don't think so. So there's more to this story, but Trump himself may just kind of, throw up his hands. Yeah.
There is that push, as Tom mentions, in the Senate. Grassley's behind it, a bunch of other, and I think there are 80 members who have come out for this, and it would be sanctions on anyone who buys energy from Russia. So it's not just sanctioning Russia; it's really trying to cut off their ability to market their, their oil, their gas, and their uranium.
Well, that's right, Andy. And the Donald Trump has succeeded in one thing, and he's already done this. One of his hobby horses, and he talked about this a lot when he was president the first time and during the campaign, he didn't think the Europeans spend sufficiently in their own defense. Well, they're doing it now, and they're actually have replaced the EU now is more of a supporter of Ukraine than the United States. Maybe that's a good thing, but Donald Trump doesn't want failure. He doesn't, walking away from, it's not a real estate deal where the guy's going to come back with a better deal, or maybe it is, but he doesn't, Trump himself said this. Putin was playing him. He said, tapping me along. A more contemporary word would be playing him along. And that's what some of these Republicans are starting to say, even publicly. Joni Ernst said something like this, Andy, which is, it's not a good look for the president, for Vladimir Putin to play, to play Trump, for a fool, but she didn't say for a fool, but to play him. And I think that is making some of these Republicans uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about our northern neighbor for a minute. Big day in Canada today.
The 51st state?
I wish you'd quit saying that, Tom. Every time you do it.
King Charles.
More and more people sign up.
Do it just to troll you, Carl.
All right. All right. So King Charles was in Canada today. He delivered what is called the Speech from the Throne. I love that. It opens the new session of Parliament. It's the first time in 50 years that an actual sovereign has delivered this address to Parliament. Certainly was interpreted as a response to Trump's threats to make Canada the 51st state, as well as Tom's threats, I guess. The speech is actually written by the Prime Minister's team, but it's delivered by the monarch. And here's just a little bit of the speech, just so you get a flavor, Tom.
Today, Canada faces another critical moment. democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination, and freedom are values which Canadians hold dear and ones which the government is determined to protect. The system of open global trade that, while not perfect, has helped to deliver prosperity for Canadians for decades, is changing. Canada's relationships with partners are also changing.
So very diplomatic, I guess, but pretty clear what he's talking about, don't you think, Tom?
Yeah, pretty clear. But so confession time here. I didn't know this was a thing. I didn't know, the speech from the throne, or that, King Charles is actually the head of state, and that this was written, I was learning all of this as I was reading it this morning, which is fascinating. But by the way, Charles has got, as head of the British state, he's got his own relationship with Trump, and the British government has their own relationship with Trump, and he's invited him to come over there. And so it's a bit of a thread the needle, high wire act here for Charles to do this. But he clearly was talking about the United States and the relationship with Canada. And I think what was there to support them and give them some moral support on the world stage, which I think is exactly what he did.
Yeah. Carl, what'd you make of it?
Well, in the American context, a chief of state giving a speech from the throne was understood once upon a time in Washington for LBJ, President Johnson barking out orders to his aides while on the toilet. This was a little more dignified than that. Then my mind started, once you could see I started thinking of this, my mind just went where it wanted to go. And I thought, maybe Putin is trying to build the old Soviet empire. Maybe Charles wants to, bring Canada back in the fold, make it British again. Canada's changed a lot since then. But look, he was saying, maybe you have, in so many words, and Tom's right, he was diplomatic, but in so many words, you have more in common with us than you do with America right now. That seemed to be what he was saying. Despite the specific critique about tariffs, but it was a sort of a cultural appeal too, I thought. What did you think, Andy?
Well, I was struck by two other things about it. Well, one was that he talked about rebuilding the Canadian military, which actually I think Trump would be for that. And he also talked about securing the border. So there was enough in there I think the White House won't be totally displeased with it. But I also think it's fascinating that the speech is delivered by King Charles, but written by Mark Carney, the new prime minister. So really sort of layered, interesting diplomacy. I think it was an interesting moment. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And Carl, the FBI is actually reopening some major cases that were previously dormant. This was announced by Deputy Director Dan Bongino on Monday. They include who owned the cocaine that was found at the Biden White House back in the summer of 2023, and the Supreme Court leak of the Dobbs decision back in 2022. Third case is who placed the pipe bombs back on January 5th of 2021. That was the night before the January 6th riots. So what do you make of this move to look into these, and are you interested to see what they can learn?
Well, I couldn't care less about the cocaine, and I don't think the American people do either.
Wrong, but go ahead.
Okay. Wait, you're channeling our old friend
McLaughlin. Yeah, that was excellent.
Yes.
I love
Wrong.
it.
Yeah,
Wrong.
I don't care about that. I was assumed it was Hunter Biden or one of his pals. I don't really care about that. And the leak of the Dobbs decision was not a great look for the left, for liberals, progressives. It was an attempt to manipulate the process. It didn't work.
You don't think it affected the midterms?
But the pipe bomb. I mean, in the fever swamps of the right wing, it was a government, is a false flag thing, or a government stoolie, or somebody who planted those. The FBI's investigation didn't get very far as far as we, the public, knows. I'd be very interested in if they have more information about that, and that because we want to know as much as we can about January 6th. And I'm neither a conspiracy theorist nor a dupe. I know conspiracies do happen. But it may not be fruitful. They simply may not know. There's this, for those of you who are uninitiated, there's this footage of a person in a hoodie planning those bombs, and they never were able to go beyond that. So now maybe Dan Bongino thinks, they can lay it to rest, or maybe he thinks there's actually something there that the FBI hid. If it's the latter, we're going to have a whole nother scandal on our hands.
Yeah. Tom, what do you make of it?
I'm in favor of all of it. I mean, I care about the cocaine in the White House. I do. I think that investigation was a sham and was, with all of the cameras in the White House and the security and stuff, and the Secret Service is like, whatever, we don't know, can't figure it out, we're just going to move on. Same thing with the Dobbs decision. I mean, you're telling me that the Supreme Court, and by the way, Carl, I guess you assume it was a liberal. There are theories out there that it could have been a conservative who did this, by the way. So I would like to know. I think in general, I think it's good for the country to have as much transparency as possible. I think we shouldn't just, throw up our hands and move on with these investigations. If they look into it, they really do dig into it, and it leads to dead ends, fine. But I just don't believe that. It felt to me in both of those situations, and maybe the January 6th case as well, that there was just not enough desire or curiosity to get to the actual truth. And I think Tom, the public deserves the truth. And I think the people who did that deserve to be held accountable for their actions.
We should probably give a plug to Susan Crabtree, our reporter, who broke the stories about the cocaine and about how the Secret Service actually tried to destroy the evidence.
Right.
Yeah. So
we know that investigation was not handled, properly, and that was not all on the up and up, for sure.
That's my suspicion too. I guess what I'm saying is, that seems like what this country is facing now, such a trivial matter.
I hear that, Carl, but at the same time, like, how are you going to restore trust to these institutions if you're just willing to, sort of, well, it's just cocaine in the White House. Like, who cares about that? It's such a trivial thing.
I already broke it. I think the cocaine story is important. I think they're all important stories. And the thing that unites them all in my mind is how much evidence there is for all three of them, or how much evidence there should be. I mean, these are not sort of little out of the way places, that nobody, how many cameras are in the White House? How much security is there at the Supreme Court when it comes to these decisions? We have a photo of the guy who planted the pipe bomb, we think. And yet we can't sort of run these cases to ground. It seems to me strange. Now, Dan Bongino did say, on his podcast, he was one of the guys saying that the FBI was behind that, or involved in that pipe bomber thing. So that's interesting. Just sort of a side note, but both Patel and Bongino have now said that Jeffrey Epstein was a suicide. So there's a whole conspiracy theory there. How did, have they been bought off somehow? So this has layers and layers and layers to it. So,
well, they said that they had seen the case file and they know what a suicide looks like. And so the question is, but here's the question. Do you trust them? Do you trust what they have to say? And one of the reasons that, people don't trust them is because they've been lied to by James Comey and these other folks who've run the FBI. And so this is a trust building exercise. Right.
And Carl, I know you trust the FBI, right? So
never have.
Well, the interesting piece sort of along these lines is by the New York Post columnist Miranda Devine, who's a friend of the show, comes on every now and then. But she wrote on Monday, Carl, that the FBI agents responsible for covering up the Hunter Biden laptop scandal are not getting the attention they deserve. And they deserve more attention than they've gotten from the FBI in terms of straightening it out.
Well, I'm going to please both you and Tom. I agree with that wholeheartedly. You had the FBI that in that by the time the campaign came around, the 2020 presidential campaign, the FBI had basically turned into an arm of the Clinton campaign, of the DNC. They did all these things, bullied Twitter and Facebook into taking down posts, mischaracterized evidence before a FISA court to spy on Donald Trump in the previous campaign, weren't forthcoming about COVID, what they knew about COVID. The FBI as a crime-fighting organization, I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the arm of the FBI, the brass, and the political people who had decided that they didn't want Donald Trump to be president either time. And this laptop came out. You had these 51 intelligence officers. Basically, this is a Clinton campaign dirty trick. Signed this misleading and slyly worded letter. We don't have evidence, but we think this has all the earmarks of Russian misinformation, Russian disinformation. At a time, the FBI knew that was wrong and was utterly silent. These are the people Miranda Devine's talking about. She wrote about this in her book, The Laptop from Hell. The New York Post itself was censored by the Biden administration with the imprimatur of the FBI. On that, I do think they need to get to the bottom of this. And if these agents are still there in positions of authority in the FBI, they should be made testify before Congress. I'm not interested in criminal investigations, but they should be made. They should be named. They should be made to explain who told them to do this, and they should be forced to retire. That is not what the FBI is supposed to do. Cover up evidence that will help one presidential campaign over another. I couldn't feel more strongly about it.
Don't forget the shaming part. Name and shame.
So this is what she wrote in part, Tom. She said, despite the fact that Donald Trump is back in the White House and his ally Kash Patel is FBI director, there has been little progress on unraveling one of the most egregious abuses of FBI power, coercing social media companies to censor the Post, the New York Post, and cover up evidence of Biden corruption before the 2020 election. She really is the person who sort of, ran that story to ground, right? She probably has a little bit of a personal feeling about this, I would think.
As she should, because she was, she was ridiculed. She was treated, I think, poorly
she was attacked
by the mainstream media. It was interesting because I actually posted something the other day about her and about how, Jake Tapper is getting all of this publicity saying, oh, the conservatives were right, But if a conservative had written the same book that Jake Tapper wrote, do you think any of these news organizations would be having him on? Mm-hmm. No. And the case that I cited was Miranda Devine's Laptop from Hell. You know how many late night shows she got to do and how many network interviews she got to do? 0. Okay. And not on the New York Times bestseller list, even though the book went straight to #1 on Amazon. So that's a sidebar, but she definitely does. She's the expert on this. And the whole time that the laptop was being, ridiculed and people were saying, oh, we can't trust that. And remember, Leslie said, oh, we can't verify that. We can't. All these news organizations basically went out of their way to say, either it's just a Rudy Giuliani, op or something. The FBI was sitting on the laptop for over a year. And they did nothing. They said nothing. In fact, to Carl's point, they did the opposite. They went to social media companies and said, shut down anybody who's talking about this. It is outrageous when you think about what they've done. And they do need to be held accountable. If there are people within the FBI who still, who are still there, who are still drawing a salary, whatever the case may be, name them and shame them. I agree with Carl. I don't necessarily want to throw them in jail, but they do need to be, I think, publicly ridiculed. And quite frankly, Miranda Devine has owed an apology.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. We'll be back right after these words. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And Carl, the Trump administration is continuing its battle with Harvard. They announced today, Tuesday, that they are asking all federal agencies to find ways to end their contracts with Harvard and to find alternatives to Harvard going forward. The Trump administration says that Harvard is defying a Supreme Court ruling that bans considering race in its admissions process, and that the university hasn't done enough to combat anti-Semitism on campus. So what do you make of this latest battle and what is really an ongoing war now between Harvard and the Trump administration?
Well, there's two aspects to it. The first is Harvard guilty of these sins that President Trump and other conservatives are leveling at the school, a school that predates the existence of the United States by 100 years. I mean, Harvard was instrumental in helping form the country. Harvard sent,
that was then,
these
Carl.
scions
now.
of the rich.
Yeah, let's
to go
not get
fight,
carried away with the
to go
Harvard
fight in the
praise
Civil
here.
War.
As a Princeton guy, I'm taking offense.
But so the question is Harvard breaking federal law and discriminating against Asians and whites, particularly white men? And is it, the Supreme Court says it was. Has it changed its ways? We don't think so. Is the DEI and anti-racism and colonialism narrative there, besmirched the school's reputation and inhibited it from producing good scholars, especially in the social, in the humanities? Has Harvard become a cesspool of anti-Semitism and pro-Hamas sentiment? This is one question. Alan Gerber, the president of Harvard, in an interview on All Things Considered with NPR, basically kind of copped to it. And said, "Yeah, we don't have diversity of viewpoint here. The anti-Semitism, we need to do better." He said this, and I thought it was an astonishing admission. But he argues that taking away this money for grants that is not charity, it's not given to Harvard because Harvard's got a good name. These are grants to do real research, presumably that benefits the taxpayer and the country as a whole, that it's the wrong approach. But I would say this one thing and would point out, because I don't think the government, this heavy-handed approach, the federal government makes me uncomfortable. But would Harvard even be admitting any of this if it wasn't for these threats that the administration has leveled? I don't think so. So I think whether he wins the court battles, whether Congress goes along with taking away the funding, whether that's even the right thing to do, this threat, there's a carrot and a stick. This is an awfully big stick. It has forced Harvard to admit some of these things publicly that they never would have admitted before.
Carl, I agree with that. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend saying, Trump's blows against Harvard are landing, that they're actually, this all-out assault on the institution. There was also an editorial suggesting, is the Trump administration trying to destroy Harvard altogether? Maybe that's the case, but I definitely think they're pushing to get Harvard and academia writ large to engage in some reform, engage in some taking a look at exactly what's been going on at these institutions. And I also think the leverage that they're using with these grant dollars brings up this idea of, is this the proper system? Can't some of this research be done privately? Shouldn't it be done privately? Why have we created a system where these institutions, these academic institutions are, reliant on and scooping up a lot of these dollars from the federal government? I mean, so there may be some reform aspects there as well, but it's clearly the administration has, first it was Columbia, but now has sort of honed in on Harvard and is going after them fairly relentlessly. And they are winning some concessions.
Yeah.
Andy, it's not like the Trump administration has gone after, Cabrillo Junior College in California. If you take on Harvard, you're taking on the biggest, meanest kid on the block. Whatever you say about Trump, this is not a cowardly attack. This is not David and Goliath. This is Goliath and Goliath, right?
Yeah. What strikes
Again,
me,
as a Princeton guy, I take offense to that.
Sorry, Tommy.
but here's what strikes me about it is that it goes back to what you were saying, Carl. The argument seems to be, we're not great. We are maybe a little anti-Semitic, and maybe but we're so important. This research we're doing is so important that you should leave us alone. And it seems to me that sort of misses the point of the exercise. The exercise, Columbia, to their credit, said, you know what, we're gonna change, and they're off the hook with Trump to a large extent. Harvard says, no, we're not going to change. And we aren't going to change because we're so big and important. And we have all these, Harvard graduates, lawyers and stuff, including some of your lawyers, Mr. Trump. And I just find that seems to me, like I said, to be sort of missing the point of the of the exercise entirely. And I think that people do focus too much on that second thing, which is, oh my gosh, it's Harvard. It's the, it's an important institution and they're doing all this cancer research. Well, true enough, but all you got to do is maybe abide by the Supreme Court and stop the anti-Jewish activities on your campus, and things can go back to normal.
Well, I agree with you, Andy. I mean, the question sort of answers itself. Gee, can the federal government find an institution that's not anti-Semitic to do cancer research? I bet they could.
Yeah. So, Tom, another aspect of this is Trump said that he wanted to take $3 billion in money that's going to Harvard and redirect it to vocational training, which, again, is kind of a brilliant political move, it seems to me. If you look at the politics of this, I don't think you can go wrong with the base if you're talking about improving vocational training and you're going after Harvard elites.
No, and that's one of the reasons that the Trump administration continues to press this case against Harvard, is because Harvard's a great foil for the administration. I mean, they are battling these sort of, Ivy Tower academic elites. And this is an extension of that. I mean, it is. It's for a party that has become the party of the working class, blue collar. This is a genius move. And I think it also speaks to, this goes back to, and we've talked about this before, there have been pushes, micro, dirty jobs, this idea that over the last few decades, we have diminished the value of jobs and people who do work with their hands in favor of this, high school to Harvard pipeline where you go there and you learn about finance or, gender studies or whatever. And those people subsequently,
how racist America is.
Yeah, but also those people become elites that look down on people who do the jobs that actually make America function, right? We could do with a lot less gender studies majors. The country would be just fine. We can't do with a lot less truck drivers or electricians or engineers, people who are, plumbers and the like. And so I think re-emphasizing that as again, Mike Rowe, if you followed his career, he's spectacular at advocating for us to, sort of reinstill values and value, attach it to these jobs that we need and that are, quite frankly, you can make a lot of money by being an independent contractor, starting your own business and working your own hours. They're good jobs, and people get a lot of satisfaction, a lot more satisfaction than sitting in front of a computer screen, trading the latest, exotic, bond or whatever a lot of folks are doing on Wall Street.
Yeah.
Well, Tom had a friend. He's gone now, Foster Fries, who's made a lot of money and gave back. And one of the things he gave back to was a charity that promotes vocational training, Foster's Outriders, it's called. And Tom actually is instrumental in that charity. And Andy, it just reminds you, we need people. Trump comes out of the construction business. We need people who know how to build buildings and build things and fix things. And it's not only good politics, I think it's good policy as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Tom and Carl, but don't go away. We'll be back with more Real Clear Politics right after these words.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. Joined now by John Hart. He is the CEO of Open the Books. John, great to have you on the show.
Great to be on, Tom. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you. Okay, you Open the Books published a story on your Substack, which I highly recommend people go to and follow and subscribe. You guys are doing great work trying to bring transparency to government spending and all of the nonsense that's going on there. Your latest post from this morning, which we ran on Real Clear Politics this afternoon, is about DOGE's unfinished business. Explain to our listeners what you're talking about here.
Well, so when I worked in the Senate, I spent years working for a representative, then Senator Tom Coburn. He was one of the very few members that not only talked about cutting spending, he successfully did it. And so when this is one of these like white whale topics, oh, if we could only cut spending in Washington. Well, the reality is there have been success stories. The successes haven't been nearly as big as we'd like them to be. And so the message that I'm trying to communicate through Open the Books is to say it is possible to do this. The public overwhelmingly wants more efficiency, and not just more efficiency, they want a transfer of power and authority from the federal government to their lives. So every dollar saved in Washington is a dream realized somewhere in America. Because when we shift power from the federal government back to individuals and local communities, you see freedom expand. So that's kind of the vision and the dream. And back in the Tea Party era, we actually cut spending by almost $950 billion over a 10-year period. And a really helpful reality check, as you remember the earmark battle, you know, when Coburn went after the bridge to nowhere in 2005, that was 7 years after he started going after earmarks. So in 1998, took 7 years for that vote to happen. And then it took another 5 years for an earmark moratorium to come into effect. So that was a 12-year fight over one area. So as we kind of critique and look at what DOGE has done, the reality check that's helpful to say is, number one, it is possible to cut spending. Number two, it's a lot harder than it looks. It's a lot harder to make these changes durable. And that's really what I want to get across in this column, is to say that if you really want to have an honest conversation about what DOGE is doing, you have to ask the right question. This isn't like the legacy media does these fact checks of DOGE. Well, are the cuts real or not? Well, it really is not that simple. It's a question of, are the cuts durable? In other words, is it going to be hard or easy for a subsequent Congress or administration to reverse what DOGE has done? And in politics, it's a truism to say there are no permanent victories or defeats. You know, attitudes, sentiments change. Programs that seem permanent can often be here today and gone tomorrow. So this kind of the takeaway is that DOGE has identified a very, very rich target list, and it's really up to Congress. It's Congress's responsibility to enact these savings and make them durable. Now, even though DOGE's quote cuts, they're at a minimum very clear and strong signals of the administration's and the president's potential intent to veto bills that do not follow these requirements. So it does have force behind it. It isn't just an advisory group, outside government. It's part of the administration. So I would sort of give Elon more credit there than he gave himself.
You mentioned Senator Tom Coburn. He was the OG DOGE. What do you think he'd think of the DOGE movement and how it was received in Congress by, Democrats and the media? And I mean, they got off to a roaring start and seemed to get bogged down with lawsuits and the like. But how do you think Coburn's? What's he?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think about this a lot all the time. Yeah, I think number one, he would be absolutely elated that Elon Musk gave his time and attention to this cause. And again, back in the Simpson Bowles era, after the financial crisis, 2007, 2008, we would have killed to have had someone of his stature, of Elon Musk's stature, in our corner. Because here you had, even though Coburn was known in conservative circles, we didn't have the technologists of our day fighting with us. We didn't have a Steve Jobs or Bill Gates coming alongside of us saying, hey, this is a really sensible thing to do to downsize the administrative state that's been growing like gangbusters for 90 years, now 100 years. And so I think he would be thrilled that Elon was even a part of this conversation. And so I have a lot of consternation with, it's a very Washington thing to sort of second guess what Elon Musk did or didn't do. And that's all good to like critique it. But Elon has asked for feedback himself. He said, hey, if we make a mistake, we want to know. And that shows so much more maturity than most members of Congress, frankly, and most people in politics. All they want are strokes and pats on the back. So I think Coburn would be ecstatic that Elon was involved in it, but he wouldn't be surprised by the pushback. He would not be surprised at how hard it is. And he would be relentlessly focused on, let's get some wins. Let's really document in excruciating detail what DOGE has found and deliver those findings to the country, but also to the key members of Congress on committees who have the authority and power to make these changes permanent.
Yeah, well, obviously, you've got this big, beautiful bill that's winding its way through Congress, passed the House by one vote. Now the Senate is taking it up, and seems like I saw, a clip of Ron Johnson saying he wants more cuts. What do you make of, like, what would you grade the House bill on a, I don't know, 1 through 10 or A through F, however you want to do it? And what do you think is going to happen in the Senate?
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to punt, I would almost give it a 5 in the sense that I'm very sympathetic to kind of the Josh Brasheen Chip Roy case that we needed to have many more cuts, and they ended up voting for it because that the alternative was to have a big tax increase. Like, I understand the politics of it. I understand that to sort of make the perfect the enemy of the good was not a desirable thing, and self-immolation is a one-use strategy in these situations. But we need to sort of take that bill, and the way I would answer that, there's nothing stopping Congress right now from working together on a bipartisan, bicameral basis to do a very serious overhaul of the administrative state. And just as we made some gains 10 or 15 years ago, we need to go way beyond what Coburn and DeMint and the Tea Party era did. Tom, we've been growing the administrative state for 100 years. And I'm kind of in the Milton Friedman camp of let's go back to 4 agencies. Let's have, state, treasury, defense, justice. And just as a matter of compromise, we can put everything else in the basket of interstate commerce. But that's not extreme at all. That's exactly the sort of measured step that the country needs to take. And I think normal taxpayers would be very receptive to a serious overhaul of federal agencies.
But I don't see the Democrats with any interest or desire. I mean, I remember when DOGE first started and they were defending all these programs, right? And I was like, it would make political sense to be like, yes, we agree there need to be cuts, but let's do it together and let's work together and let's work through Congress, as opposed to just, going rogue or doing whatever. But there wasn't even that. There was just absolutely defense of the status quo. You can't cut a thing. So I don't know that there is enough desire for any sort of bipartisanship on this front. Am I wrong? You're not wrong right now, but the desire can be created. So let me give you one example on just the issue of transparency. Remember, it was, as you know, Coburn and Barack Obama who worked together to create USA Spending. That bill put all federal spending online back in almost 20 years ago, 2006. And that created an ecosystem of groups that have made a lot of what DOGE has already done successful. That put all the federal spending out there to be scrutinized and to be verified. So Democrats really, if they have any sort of neural activity, ought to get on the transparency issue and focus, because there's a need for an upgrade to USA Spending to give everyone the same look at the Treasury payment system that Elon has. Now, in terms of actually making the cuts within the agencies, is that the answer is to keep trying and to create so much pain that the pain of not changing exceeds the pain of changing. And if you go back to welfare reform, when Newt and Bill Clinton worked together, that took three efforts, a major bill. So if you look at the issue as it is now and where Congress is, yes, it looks almost impossible to do it. But the way to do it is to put together a very serious, thoughtful agency reorganization bill, and then make it get voted down, and then do it again, do it again, do it again. And you keep doing it until the average person says, why in the world are we not willing to rethink how we've organized federal agencies in 100 years? This is crazy. And to shift the crazy onto those who refuse to reform government. All right. Well, we are going to have to leave it there. John Hart, CEO of Open the Books. John, thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. And again, go to Open the Books, go to the Substack, and you can certainly read on RealClearPolitics DOGE's Unfinished Business, which is their latest post. John, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
You're right, Tom. Thank you.
All right. And that's going to do it for us. On behalf of Andy and Carl, I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. Everybody have a great night. See you back here tomorrow.